Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into the work of one of psychoanalysis's most brilliant and, let's be honest, baffling minds, Jacques Lacan. We're going to use his ideas to explore a topic that ties all of us in knots: love.
So, we're going to use Lacan's ideas, especially from his famous Seminar XX, to really get into this question. It's a question I guarantee everyone has asked at some point, and what's so cool about Lacan is that he offers a pretty radical but surprisingly useful way to think about it.
You know, Lacan himself knew his work was tough. He even joked about it. But he believed that actually wrestling with these complex ideas is where the real insight happens. He gives us this powerful framework for understanding ourselves, if we just stick with him. Okay, let's dive in.
Here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with that universal question. Then, we'll get into the trouble with words themselves, our first big clue. From there, we'll look at the idea of loving a beautiful illusion, followed by this really intense concept Lacan calls the other satisfaction. And all of that is going to lead us to his most startling conclusion of all.
All right, so our first clue for understanding love, according to Lacan, isn't actually found in our feelings, but in the very words we use to talk about them.
He argues that we don't just use language, we're literally born into it. It's the operating system that shapes our every thought, our every desire. But here's the twist. Lacan believed this very system that we rely on for everything, well, it's fundamentally flawed.
Lacan calls words signifiers, and the really crucial point here is the gap this slide points out. The signifier, the word love, it creates a meaning effect, an idea of love in our heads. But that word will always fall short of the actual messy, real-world experience. There's always a disconnect.
And this little formula, it shows that disconnect perfectly. Lacan puts that thick black bar you see there between the signifier, the capital S, and what it points to, the lowercase s, to show that language always misses the mark. It never perfectly captures reality. And this fundamental mismatch is a huge source of misunderstanding, especially in love. Now let's see how this affects who or what we actually fall in love with.
So, if our words can't ever really capture reality, our second clue suggests that what we fall in love with might not be quite real, either.
Lacan tells this fantastic little story about Picasso's pet parakeet to make a really profound point. Apparently, this bird would just lovingly nibble on Picasso's collar all day. See, it wasn't in love with Picasso the man, the famous artist, the whole complex person. No, it was in love with just one specific part of him, his clothes.
And just like that parakeet, Lacan says our love is essentially narcissistic. We don't love the other person in their totality. We fall in love with the image we have of them, with the specific things about them that fascinate us and really reflect our own desires back at us. I mean, think about falling for someone's perfectly curated dating profile. You're not loving the person, you're loving the highlight reel.
Lacan even has a special name for this fascinating fantasy object. He calls it Object A. It's the cause of our desire. It's what's left over, the remainder, after language fails to capture the whole person. It's that little something extra, that spark, that beautiful illusion that we chase but can never, ever fully grasp. And chasing that illusion, well, that leads us into much more intense and sometimes even dangerous territory.
Okay, so our final clue is maybe Lacan's most challenging concept, but it's absolutely crucial if we want to understand the intensity, the passion, and the difficulty of love.
He calls this concept jouissance. It's a French word that's often translated as enjoyment, but that word is way too tame. It's an other satisfaction, a kind of disruptive, overwhelming enjoyment that goes way beyond just getting what you need. Think about it like this. Pleasure follows the rules. It seeks balance and calm, kind of like drinking a glass of water when you're thirsty. Jouissance, on the other hand, is transgressive. It's an intensity, an excess that pushes way beyond balance into something impossible, sometimes even painful. It's that raw charge in love that both electrifies us and completely destabilizes us. So, let's pull our clues together. We've got language that fails to capture reality. We fall in love with a narcissistic fantasy, and we're driven by this disruptive excess called jouissance. So where does this whole investigation lead us?
When you put these three clues together, the failure of language, the fantasy of our desire, and the excess of jouissance, you arrive at Lacan's most famous and probably most provocative statement on the whole subject.
Now, hold on.
Lacan isn't being a killjoy here. He's not saying people don't have sex or form relationships, obviously. What he is saying is that a perfect, harmonious union, that romantic idea that two people can become one soul, is structurally impossible.
The gaps in language mean we can never fully communicate. Our narcissistic desire means we're always loving a fantasy, our object A, not the complete person. And a pursuit of jouissance means we're constantly chasing an excess that messes with any kind of harmony. So the ideal of two souls completing each other is, for Lacan, a beautiful fantasy, but a fantasy that ignores these fundamental truths.
But here's the thing. Instead of being pessimistic, this idea can actually be incredibly liberating. If love isn't about finding a perfect fusion, then what is it? Lacan's work kind of invites us to stop chasing an impossible ideal. Instead, it asks us to focus on what love actually is, the constant, messy, and fascinating navigation of all these gaps and fantasies and excesses. And it leaves us with one last crucial question. What are we really doing when we try to love, knowing it's this impossible task we just can't help but undertake?